Thank you. Well, it is my great honor and privilege and pleasure to introduce a man who truly needs no introduction, sorry for the cliche, but certainly in a room full of peaceniks, he's not someone who needs an introduction. Here is a very, very brief look at his life. My first paragraph is borrowed from Phillet from an article in the Edmonton Journal a few years ago. In 1982, at the height of the Cold War, 1 million people gathered on the streets of New York to push the world's superpowers to halt the dangerous arms race and bring the world back from the brink of mass destruction. Doug Roche was there, a 52-year-old MP from Edmonton, and now I'm finished with quoting Sheila, and he is still marching. In fact, the Project Ploughshares, the magazine from this summer, has featured Doug and called him the determined optimist, and I think that's just a wonderful phrase, because you are. He has had many careers in his long and productive life: a journalist, a newspaper editor, MP and senator, Canada's ambassador for disarmament at the UN, and in 1988 the chair of their disarmament committee, university professor, father and grandfather, and author of over 20 books. He's also done mediation work in the Catholic Church with sex abuse victims. In 1997, he became the founding chairman of the Middle Powers Initiative, a collaboration of countries and non-governmental organizations to pressure the big powers to address nuclear disarmament. It remains an important group today. In 2010, he and Nobel Prize winner Professor John Polanyi convinced more than 500 of their fellow Order of Canada recipients to sign a document calling for Ottawa to pursue a nuclear weapons convention that would ban the production of nuclear weapons. The city of Hiroshima has made him an honorary citizen to acknowledge his decades of work on arms control. He is a devout Catholic, but as I also know from my day job, a longtime member and supporter of the Edmonton Interfaith Centre. One of the things I admire and value most about his work and outlook in these rather dark times is that he continues to inspire hope. Although, of course, he's also very realistic about global power politics. Despite many setbacks to his cause, he never falls into cynicism about the prospects for peace and possibilities for change. He's a self-described realist who says that saving humanity from nuclear destruction takes pragmatic hard work. So please welcome Doug Roche.
Thank you, Netta. You are too kind. Dear friends, I want to immediately pay tribute to Project Ploughshares, undoubtedly one of the great NGOs in Canada. For the past 40 years or so, I have worked closely with Project Ploughshares and come to appreciate deeply the scope of the work of this organization in building the global security agenda. Of course, you started primarily in arms control and disarmament and still feature those elements in your work. But you have grown with the times, and you now do environmental work, human rights, the economic and social development, the sustainable development goals, and of course nuclear disarmament, that I'll say a word about tonight. But truly, the work of Project Ploughshares enhances the whole Canadian structure. It helps to inform the Government of Canada, and I think you are reaching out in various branches that I see to young people. As a matter of fact, I have mentored a lot of young people in my career, and when they ask me what they can do, I always say to them, the first thing to do is to multiply yourself, to get into an organization and participate. And I always mention Project Ploughshares as a group that they should become attached to. So the world today seems to be in a huge mess, and a lot of people are discouraged. I won't even talk about all the descriptions that could be made about the presumed leader of the country immediately south to us, because I want to get on with the rest of the world and how Canada is able to relate to the whole world. So I've written this new book. I'm thinking about it. It's called Hope Not Fear, Building Peace in a Fractured World. And I'm trying in this book to give my readers reasons for feeling and expressing hope that in our world we can develop the structures of peace so that our world will be, you know, if not a perfect place, I don't expect that will happen, but at least where there will be a norm of nonviolence and the elementary conditions for social justice. That, of course, is what Project Ploughshares stands for. And people are discouraged because they see in the headlines almost every hour there's some terrible thing happening, whether it's the force of nature or the result of political miscalculations and the greed and power structures that still dominate so much of the world. But I'm trying to say that the hope, certainly that I feel for the world, is not based on something that I wish would happen, something out in the distance and maybe someday. No. The hope that I feel is based on what we have already achieved in the world and need to build on. Need more political, human and financial resources applied to. And I start with the United Nations. 72 years ago, the United Nations came into existence. And although all the terrible things that happened around the world, we still have not had a world war since then. And millions upon millions of lives have been saved as a result of the United Nations work and the agencies, the UN Development Program, UNICEF, the organization, the UN Women, the rights of people, rights of children, the rights of women have been multiplied through these 72 years. If you look at every main artery of life, whether it's in medicine, science, agriculture, communications, transportation, I could go on with a long list of the indices by which we measure human progress. And every one of these fields is accelerating upwards, in which more people are able to obtain more benefits than ever before. 5/6 of the world is today at peace. In the 20th century, we had World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, several other wars. 100 million people were killed in the wars of the 20th century. Today, 5/6 of the world is at peace. Yes, we still have wars in the Middle East, and don't get me wrong, my heart goes out. I lament every single death in Syria, Afghanistan, or these places. But we have to keep this in perspective of the world as a whole, how we are developing ourselves into a more peaceful world community. That is a basis on which we can grow. So it's a false narrative of our times that has somehow taken hold, that everything is sort of going down a drain, and I quite concede that the headlines of the day seem to discourage us. And of course, the media, by their very nature, concentrate on confrontation. And the more, or put it this way, the bloodier the confrontation, the more cameras will be present. And the building of our society, the millions upon millions of citizens around the world who are involved in civil society movements, economic and social development movements, environmental movements, human rights movements, arms control and disarmament movements. The millions of people who are involved, they're not getting the headlines because they're doing creative work. So I just make a plea in this book to try to help people to understand that the process of building a world of peace is truly a transformation moment for us. This transformation moment that the world is going through from the old culture of war that prevailed, as I've just said, in the 20th century, into a new culture of peace in which non-violence will be the key attribute. This process takes a long time. It could take 100 years. I mean, I don't know how long that will take. But we must take some hope in the realization that we are building the institutions to support that peace. Now we have to build them more. There has to be more political and financial capital put into it. And that is our job. Certainly the job of Project Ploughshares and organizations like that is to build up public understanding, build a community of concern, helping people to reach out to one another so that we're not alone, isolated in some room or something. That together we are going forward in raising up the human condition. That's what's happening today. And that alone energizes us and gives us the strength to push on to new frontiers. So, on July 7th, a couple of months ago, a new frontier was crashed through in nuclear disarmament. For a long time, we have been struggling with the movement to abolish nuclear weapons. You know that there are still 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world. They're held by 9 countries. And of course the headlines are all today on North Korea. Of course North Korea should not have nuclear weapons, but why should other countries have them and hold them and determine to keep them while prescribing their acquisition to any other country? So I don't want North Korea to have a nuclear weapon, but I don't want the United States to have nuclear weapons, or Russia, or China, or France, or Britain, or India, or Pakistan, or Israel. And they all have nuclear weapons. So we have to stop, put a stop to the development of nuclear weapons. Fortunately, about a number of years ago, what was called the humanitarian movement got started. And a group of like-minded governments, so I would say leading governments like Austria, Ireland, Mexico, Malaysia, and a number of countries like that, got together with informed and enlightened civil society groups in nuclear disarmament. And they worked together to build a movement that showed conclusively the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would follow from the use of any nuclear weapon anywhere in the world. And thus, there had to be a new treaty. You know, it's amazing that in the world today we have treaties that prohibit chemical weapons, prohibit biological weapons. But the worst form of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, as we saw in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the worst form of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, there is no global treaty to prohibit them. It's hard to believe sometimes. So on July 7th, 122 nations of the world at the United Nations, after a series of negotiations, adopted a treaty. It's called a Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this treaty stigmatizes the possession. The signers of the treaty undertake to govern themselves that nuclear weapons are both immoral and illegal. And so the nuclear weapon states, those who are holding nuclear weapons, are fighting against this treaty. They don't want this treaty. because they know that it will stigmatize nuclear weapons. All great movements for social change. I talk about the movement to end slavery, the movement to end colonialism, the movement to end apartheid. All those movements went through 3 stages. First, the movement was ridiculed, it was scoffed at, it was brushed aside by the establishment forces of the day. And then, by keeping on, repetition, the movement entered stage 2. And stage 2 is when the establishment, the authorities, vigorously object to that which is being proposed. And the opposition goes on for quite a while, until finally the opposition is overcome and the movement is then accepted as common policy. That happened in all the movements that I referred to, and it is happening in nuclear disarmament. Nuclear disarmament has now moved from stage 1, being rebuffed, pushed aside, to stage 2, where it's vigorously objected to, and we're awaiting stage 3. So now we're in stage 2, historically speaking. And the treaty has caught the attention of all the nuclear weapon states, and particularly the United States, which is vigorously objecting to it. As a matter of fact, they wrote a letter to all their NATO partners, including Canada, saying, do not vote for this treaty and do not participate in the discussions leading up to it. And so the nuclear weapon states and the NATO states, including Canada, boycotted the negotiations that led up to the treaty. So there is a lot of opposition to be overcome. And so a week ago, about 50 organizations, and I'm glad to say Project Ploughshares was one of them, signed what's called a call on Canada to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is a full-page ad that appears in the Hill Times in Ottawa, which is read by everybody in the whole Ottawa establishment. And in this call, it calls on Canada to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and to state that it will work to change NATO policies, because NATO is still defending the existence of nuclear weapons. So this movement is now going to spread across Canada, and the next stage is that we are planning to go beyond the groups that are in the peace movement into the business community, the academic community, the science community, to sign their names to this call on Canada to sign the treaty. The Canadian government will have to be pushed, pressured, and so on to do this. The reference was made a few moments ago to the 500 members of the Order of Canada who have signed a statement. I'm glad to tell you that it is now almost 1,000 members of the Order of Canada. 1,000 members, 1,000 will be reached in about another month or so. 1,000 members of the Order of Canada have signed a statement supporting the United Nations Secretary General's work on nuclear disarmament, and calling specifically for Canada to take a major diplomatic action and to support the new prohibition treaty. So it's this work is going to go on for some time, but all of this is itself a reason for hope. And the more we, sort of plunge into the work of making our world a safer and more secure place, then the more our work is felt in the political circles of the world. In other words, we're not sort of operating in a vacuum. We're trying, in lifting up humanity's understanding or our fellow Canadians' understanding through the work that Project Ploughshares does day in and day out. We're helping to make this a safer and stronger world. That's a real reason to have hope, not fear, and to help to build peace in a fractured world. Thank you very much.